"We sold your studio, Leo. Mason needed it more." Those were the exact words my mother said, without even a hint of guilt, as she sipped her evening tea. In that moment, standing in the middle of our living room, I felt like the floor had given way beneath me. My name is Leo Carter. I'm 24, and for the past 6 years, every tutoring session, every freelance audio gig, every sleepless night had been leading up to one thing: building my $4,000 dream music studio. To them, it was just a bunch of gear collecting dust. To me, it was my future. But in my family, the future only belonged to my younger brother, Mason. Mason is 20, and if you ever needed a living example of what happens when parents create a golden child, he's it. He's got the charm, the smile, and the dangerous mix of entitlement that comes from never hearing the word no. Every new iPhone, every flashy sneaker drop, Mason had it first. If money was tight, it was my plans that got pushed aside. But I never complained. I told myself, work harder, Leo, build your own way. And I did. Piece by piece, my studio became my sanctuary. It wasn't just about making beats or chasing viral hits. That setup was how I freelanced, paid my bills, and kept my dream alive in a house where dreams only mattered if they had Mason's name on them. Until that night. I had just gotten back from a mixing gig, already thinking about the tracks I needed to finish for a client. I opened my bedroom door and froze. My desk was bare. My monitors, audio interface, my entire setup, it was all gone. At first, I thought we'd been robbed. But no, nothing else in the house was touched. It wasn't a break-in. It was something worse. I stormed downstairs, my heart pounding. "Where's my studio?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Mom didn't even look up from her tea. "We sold it, Leo. Mason's birthday is coming up. He needed the money for his party." I blinked, laughed. Maybe I misheard. But no, my dad chimed in too. "It was just sitting there, Leo. You can rebuild it. Mason's event is important." Important? More important than 6 years of grinding? More important than the freelance jobs that studio is paying for? In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about money. This was about how invisible I had become in my own family. I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled. Not out of happiness, but because I knew exactly what I needed to do next. That night, I confronted them. I stood in the living room, gripping the folder of receipts I had frantically gathered, proof of every dollar I had spent on my studio. My voice trembled, but my words cut through the silence. "You had no right. That studio wasn't a toy. It was mine. I built it." Mom didn't even blink. "Leo, Mason's 18th birthday is a milestone. He's only going to turn 18 once. You're his big brother. Family supports each other." Like that explained it. Like that erased 6 years of saving, grinding, and dreaming. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms folded with that condescending calm that always set my teeth on edge. "You're the eldest, Leo. Sacrifices are expected from you. It's part of being the responsible one." Responsible? That word hit me like a slap. They always threw it around when it suited them. Responsible meant giving up my things so Mason could shine. Responsible meant swallowing my pride so I wouldn't cause a scene. But somehow it never meant being respected. I turned to Mason, hoping maybe, just maybe, he'd have a shred of decency. But of course not. He sat there on the couch, lazily flipping through his phone, and, without looking up, said, "Thanks for pitching in, bro. Appreciate the investment." He even flashed a smug little grin, as if I was a shareholder in his popularity. The rage inside me boiled over.
It wasn't just about the studio anymore. This wasn't just about a PC or some lost gear. It was about every single time I had been overlooked, brushed aside, made to feel like a placeholder in my own family. The studio was the last piece of me they hadn't touched. Now they had. "You always talk about family sacrifice," I said, my fists trembling. "But when has Mason ever sacrificed a thing?" Silence. Mason gets new phones, new shoes, vacations, and what do I get? Guilt-tripped because I want to build something for myself? That PC wasn't a toy. It paid for my rent, my work. But you didn't even ask. You just took it because you thought I wouldn't fight back. Dad stood up, his voice hardening. "Watch your tone. This house, this roof over your head, that's because of us. We decide what's best. And what's best is always Mason, right? You've made that crystal clear." I could see Mom's expression shift. She wasn't used to me pushing back. She reached for her classic line, "We didn't mean to hurt you, Leo. You're blowing this out of proportion." I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh. "Of course you didn't mean it. You never do. You never mean to, but it happens every time. And every time, I'm supposed to be okay with it." I turned to Mason again. "You knew what you were doing. You dropped hints about my studio, knowing exactly how they'd react. You played them." Mason just shrugged. "Dude, you're so dramatic. It's just a computer." That was it. That sentence, that casual dismissal, 6 years of effort reduced to just a computer. I felt something inside me snap. Not in anger, but in clarity. There was no point arguing anymore. They weren't going to understand, and frankly, I didn't need their understanding. What I needed was to reclaim my dignity. "I'm done," I said, voice steady now. "Done letting you decide what I'm allowed to have. Done being the invisible son while Mason gets to be the prince. You've made it clear where I stand." Mom tried to soften the blow, her tone switching to that syrupy, let's calm down voice. "Leo, don't make this bigger than it is. You're family. Family sticks together." "No," I said firmly. "Family respects each other. You sold mine off for party decorations." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was freeing. I didn't slam doors. I didn't yell. I just walked back to my room, picked up my old laptop, the one that barely ran, and began planning my next move. This wasn't over. But from now on, I wasn't going to play their game on their terms. If they thought they could silence me with guilt, they were about to learn otherwise.
That night, I didn't argue. I didn't slam doors. I packed a duffel bag. No dramatic speech, no ultimatums, just silent, cold resolve. As I zipped up my bag, the house felt smaller than ever, suffocating in its self-centeredness. Mason didn't even look up from his phone when I walked past. Mom pretended not to notice. Dad, well, he was probably relieved not to deal with my attitude anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Jonah, my best friend since high school, didn't ask questions when I showed up at his place at 11 p.m. with a duffel and a broken heart. He just opened the door and said, "About time, man. Come in." He lived in a small apartment above his uncle's garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like oxygen after drowning. I collapsed onto his old futon, feeling like the weight of the entire world had shifted off my shoulders, even if just for a moment.
You'll build it back, Jonah said, tossing an ancient-looking laptop onto the coffee table. It's not much, but it'll get you started. They can take your rig, but they can't take your grind. That sentence stuck. The laptop was a relic from the dinosaur age. It wheezed every time I opened a file, but it was mine, for now. I stayed up all night, scouring freelance sites, offering to do small music editing gigs, podcast cleanups, even audio mixing for indie creators. Anything to get back on my feet. 3 days later, I landed my first gig. A local podcast needed intro music and minor sound fixes. The pay? $500. To some, it wasn't life-changing. To me, it was a declaration of war. As Jonah's garage became my makeshift studio, the hunger inside me intensified. I didn't have my expensive setup. I didn't have ergonomic chairs or soundproofed walls. I had borrowed headphones, a beat-up laptop, and a will to prove I was more than what they believed. Every dollar I earned was a reminder that they hadn't won. Each night after wrapping up projects, Jonah and I would sit on the apartment's tiny balcony, sipping cheap coffee and laughing about how Mason would probably trip over his ego one day. But deep down, I wasn't laughing. I was plotting. See, my parents thought they had taken away my leverage by selling my studio. They thought I'd crawl back home once life without their support became unbearable. But with every freelance client who paid me, every email that said, "Great job, Leo," I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. It wasn't just about the money. It was about rebuilding my identity from the ground up, this time on my own terms. For the first time, my success wasn't tied to their approval. Jonah's uncle eventually let me use the entire garage space during the day. It was dusty, cluttered with old car parts, but I claimed a small corner and slowly transformed it. Borrowed speakers, DIY foam panels, a foldable table as my desk. It wasn't my dream studio, but it was mine. And with every beat I edited, every song I mastered, I felt the distance between me and that suffocating house grow wider. Mason could have his designer suits, Mom could host her fancy dinners, Dad could preach responsibility all he wanted. None of it mattered anymore. They couldn't see it, but the more they dismissed me, the stronger I became. One night, after landing a particularly big $1,000 project, Jonah looked at me with a grin. "Feels good, huh?" I said, "It feels like I'm just getting started." And I meant it. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their support. All I needed was space to breathe, grind, and rise.
News travels fast in small towns, especially when it's bad. I didn't need to scroll far before whispers about my family's financial troubles started surfacing. Apparently, Mason's grand birthday bash, the one my parents drained my studio fund for, had ballooned into a full-blown disaster. Lavish venue, overpriced catering, custom outfits, and of course the obligatory influencer guest list that bailed last minute. In short, they spent everything they didn't have, and now the fallout was kicking in. I was sipping coffee at Jonah's place when the inevitable text lit up my screen. "Leo, we need to talk. Family is family. Please come home." A few months ago, that would have set me into a spiral of guilt. But now, I just felt numb. No anger, no hurt, just a strange, calm attachment. Jonah raised an eyebrow as I showed him the message. "You going?" "Yeah," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I didn't need to.
For once, I wasn't walking into that house on defense. When I arrived, it was like stepping into a different world. The grandiosity was gone. The house that once screamed, "Look how perfect we are," now felt hollow. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, stacks of bills spread out in front of him. Mom was pacing the living room, muttering numbers under her breath. Mason wasn't parading around in designer wear. He was slumped on the couch, scrolling his phone like a ghost of his former self. "Leo," Mom started, her tone faux cheerful, "we could really use your—" "Stop." I cut in, pulling out my phone and sliding it onto the table in front of Dad. The screen was filled with invoices, payment receipts, client testimonials, all dated after I'd left. I didn't come here to hear about family obligations. I came here to show you what you threw away. Dad's lips pressed into a thin line. Mom opened her mouth, but I didn't give her a chance. "You thought my passion was a hobby. You said my freelance work wasn't a real job. Yet in the past 2 months, I've earned more than Mason's influencer deals ever made." I watched as the weight of that sentence settled in the room. Mason, who always had a snarky comeback ready, stayed silent. He couldn't argue with numbers. His last sponsored post flopped, and everyone knew it. "You sold my studio for fund a shopping spree," I continued, voice steady. "You didn't just take my gear. You took years of work, dedication, and made it disposable for the sake of appearances." Dad tried to regain his authoritative tone. "Leo, it's been a tough time. We made mistakes, but now isn't the time for pride. We're family. We need to come together." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You need to understand something. Family isn't about using each other as stepping stones. It's about respect. And I haven't felt that from this house in a long time." For a moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. The silence was louder than any apology they could have offered. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," Mason muttered, finally finding his voice, but it lacked its usual venom. "Nothing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. Seems like nothing was enough to keep this family afloat when you ran out of Dad's credit cards." His face flushed, but he didn't respond. I stood up, gathering my phone. "I didn't come here to fix your mistakes. I came here to show you I don't need your validation anymore. I'm doing fine, and I'm not your safety net." Mom's voice cracked as she reached out. "Leo, please, we can figure this out. Together." But her words felt hollow, because together, in their dictionary, always meant me sacrificing, them benefiting. "You figure it out. I already did." As I walked to the door, Mason's voice followed, softer than I'd ever heard it. "You think you're better than us now?" I paused, turned, and said, "No, Mason. I've always been better at owning up to my mistakes. That's the difference." With that, I left. For the first time, their house didn't feel like my home. It felt like a past chapter, one that I had finally outgrown. And it felt liberating. I walked out of that house knowing they'd never really get it. My words probably didn't change their minds. Maybe they never will. But for the first time in my life, that realization didn't sting. It felt like closure. They had their priorities, and I finally had mine. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. While my family tried to patch their crumbling image with hollow apologies and half-hearted invitations, I was busy laying the foundation of my own empire. The freelance gigs started piling up. Small businesses, indie creators, even a few local startups reached out for design work after seeing my posts online. The community I had nurtured through late-night streams and honest conversations was now rooting for me louder than ever. And then it happened. A gaming content agency I admired, Level Shift Studios, sent me an email. They'd been watching my streams, following my design work, and they wanted to collaborate on a digital content project. Not just a one-off gig, but a contract. My first real independent contract. I sat in my tiny studio, reading the email over and over, half expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. It was real. It was mine. I called Jonah immediately. "Bro, you're not going to believe this." "Level shift?" he said, almost dropping his phone. "Dude, that's huge! You're in!" It was more than huge. It was validation. Years of working in the shadows, being the background character in my own family had led me to this moment. And the best part? It had nothing to do with them. This was mine, built with my late nights, my grinding through slow laptops, my refusal to quit. When I shared the news on my stream, the chat exploded. "Leo, you did it! We knew you'd make it, bro! From the basement to the big leagues, let's go!" Even people who'd only known me for a few months cheered like we'd been through it all together. That night, my viewer count hit an all-time high. People weren't just there for the gameplay. They were there for the story. They were there because they saw me. Not as the forgotten son, not as the backup plan, but as Leo, the creator who made it on his own terms. I'd be lying if a part of me didn't wish my family could see this. But not out of spite, not for revenge, just to show them what respect and belief could have nurtured. But I didn't need them to validate it anymore. My work, my supporters, my progress, those were the only stamps of approval I needed. A month into the contract, Level Shift invited me to co-host a design segment on their live channel. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't polished, but it was authentic. I shared my journey. The setbacks, the betrayals, and how in the end it all fueled my drive. The comment section flooded with messages from people who'd felt the same way in their own families. Dismissed, overlooked, told their passions were just hobbies. Somehow my story gave them a voice too. Recognition didn't come with a family gathering. It didn't come with hollow praise from people who never saw my worth. It came from proving to myself that I was more than their expectations. Jonah said it best when we were walking home from a night shoot. "You didn't just get your rig back, Leo. You got your life back." And he was right. The PC wasn't the victory. The apartment wasn't the victory. The victory was never needing to ask for permission again. One evening, as I wrapped up a stream, I saw a message in my inbox. It was from a former classmate. Someone who used to side-eye me for being the kid who stayed home to tinker with graphics. The message read, "Hey man, I've been following your work. It's incredible how far you've come. Would love to collaborate if you're up for it." That moment hit different. It wasn't about being seen by the people who wronged me. It was about being recognized by people who understood the grind. I wasn't just building a career. I was building a legacy they could never take away.
Leaving wasn't the easy choice. It never is when you're walking away from people you've spent your life trying to please. But staying, that would have been a slow erosion of everything I had built for myself. For years, I believed that if I kept my head down, kept grinding, kept sacrificing, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. But I've learned a hard truth. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up for you. When my parents sold my dream PC, it wasn't just about money or hardware. It was a declaration of where I stood in their priorities. My sister's image was worth more than my effort. My hard work was disposable if it got in the way of their convenience. But through all of it, Jonah stood by me. My small but fierce online community lifted me up. Clients who valued my skills kept me moving forward. They became the family I chose. Rebuilding wasn't instant. Every late-night stream, every freelance deadline, every dollar saved felt like stitching together a life that was mine and mine alone. And slowly, it happened. The weight of their approval faded. The need for validation dissolved. I realized I didn't need their permission to be proud of myself. For anyone out there feeling trapped, whether it's a family that doesn't see your worth, friends who belittle your dreams, or a life that feels dictated by other people's expectations, this is your sign. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to choose yourself, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for your own dignity. Because when you finally take that step, when you decide that your happiness isn't up for debate, the freedom is indescribable. It's not just about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were enough, all along. If this story hit home for you, I want to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is a space where your voice matters. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I'm building a community where passion is celebrated, not dismissed. We're not just telling stories here, we're rewriting them.